Almost more than anything else, I catch myself daydreaming about what it would be like to be something really small, really tiny. Take these bees, for instance. As a human sitting here in the Museum of Science in Boston, Massachusetts, it's hard to see anything but a swarm of vibrating bodies buzzing their wings and walking around this queen like we know what's going on. But we don't know what's going on. You could take that same image of those same bees and slow it down 10 times. And you'll see that it's not as obvious what's happening. Not all of the bees are moving. Some of the bees have a job where they're flapping their wings. And even with the time slowed down 10 times, you can see that the bees that flap their wings are still flapping them too fast for us to see. And in fact, bees can flap their wings 240 flaps per second. And so we are capturing the bees at somewhere around 240 frames a second. And you can still see it's not fast enough. I think one of the mistakes that we continue to make when it comes to trying to imagine what it's like to be a smaller animal is that we continue to assume that they live and die on the scale of time that humans feel intuitively. We have a time scale, a second, an hour, a minute. We've created a timer. We've created a standardization of duration. And then we consider smaller animals like a fruit fly, something that only lives for 3 or 4 days. We consider that animal worthless. Or why does it matter that I killed a fruit fly? They only live for 3 days. But to a fruit fly, that 3 days is a lifetime. The same, I would argue, lifetime that any organism experiences. They're born, they grow up, they become functional, they do the thing they're supposed to do, which maybe they rebel against. The biological impetus for creating new and smaller generations. So we take a look at these bees, and we take a look at us outside looking at the bee. For the 5 minutes that person A, let's call her Karen, is sitting there watching these bees, to the bees, Karen has been sitting there watching them for much longer than 5 minutes. And what we don't have is a standardization of what the scale of time changes, how space-time scales. Because we know from physics that space-time is one thing. And so if you scale down in scale, you should also be scaling down in time. So we should have some kind of equivalency for animals that are smaller than us, that have their synapses spaced very close together, or use an entirely different brain structure. For example, ants. According to us, they don't even have the type of brains that can have thinking happen. And yet ants have created civilization, architecture, they have a social structure, they have wars with other ants. There is an entire history at the smaller scale that humans have just decided doesn't matter because there's no possible way that ants can think on an individual basis, even though we have examples of it. And the same myth of a hive mind or a collective consciousness keeps being pushed forward. And also, we refuse to give animals the benefit of the doubt when it comes to experience and thinking and thought. And for example, I saw an article very recently, an article about how do we know how dogs respond to human words? Like walk or... So they were going to put dogs in an MRI machine to determine, let's take a look at their brains, what parts of their brains light up when we ask them to go for a walk, for example. But again, it's quite apparent that dogs understand what humans say. The example was, when you say, hey, let's go for a walk to a dog, does the dog, in his mind, actually think, in the future, I'm going to be outside having a walk? Or does it think, oh, that word means something good is going to happen. I don't know what it might be, but I've been trained that that word means something good, and so therefore I'm excited. I think a lot of these experiments and a lot of these thought experiments don't do enough work decoding or dismantling the human perspective of the hypothesis. They don't take into account several factors that make it such that humans can't actually understand without becoming. So there's a limitation to the type of knowledge that we can get as humans coming from the perspective of we're the only smart animal. Take a look at a beaver house. That house provides protection from predators, and the beaver has to, it's not in its DNA that it's going to build this house. It's taught this thing, and it's also got an adaptation from millions of years of ancestors who've all sort of been building houses, and then when they grow up, obviously they see their family building houses. You know, if you had a beaver from birth in your house, it's not just going to start at some point chewing up your house. I don't have a proof of that, but that's what I think, is that it wouldn't automatically happen just because of DNA. Just like the same way that humans wouldn't automatically understand, oh, I can type on a computer. Like, you have to, in some way, observe other people doing it. And I think not treating animals as though they are having the same experience that we are in the continual consciousness aspect, where they are aware and information is constantly entering and being interpreted and being acted upon, using either some sort of logic or some sort of experience. And if we can't say that an ant or a bee has its own type of intelligence because what its brain looks like doesn't look like anything to us, we don't recognize some very fundamental and important ways that brains can work without looking like our brains. And there's something called functionalism in philosophy. And functionalism is the idea that if we met aliens and aliens had, for example, a vat of liquid as their brain, but they were able to perform all the same thoughts and their brain is just as valid a brain. I apply the same thinking to smaller animals. And I argue that based on my experience of being me, I can see other animals experiencing being themselves in the same way that I see other humans experiencing being themselves. And I think a big part of it, there's this idea called anthropodenial, which is that humans don't want to give other animals the possibility of being smart or smarter than us, or even having emotions, having thoughts. It's a major justification for what we do to livestock animals. And it's just bullshit. It's not real. And I think that it's infiltrated science, and science has used anthropodenial in much the same way to determine much of the same bullshit outcomes when it comes to chimpanzees, when it comes to great apes and monkeys in cages, rats even, that fly in your house, the fruit fly, the gnat in front of your face that you want to slap out of the air. It's living on a scale we don't understand.